Father, that's been our prayer during this series, that we would have more of your presence. Not just in our lives in general, but that your presence would be welcomed into and invade every area of our lives. We desire a touch from heaven. We want to see your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. We're so grateful that we get to see so many glimpses of you and have you moving in the lives of people in our church. And we're so grateful for the 13 people last Sunday, Father, that followed you in baptism. For those who are having their lives changed by you from the inside out. May we never take that for granted. May we always appreciate and celebrate when we see you changing hearts. Would you speak to us now? Would you open us up to whatever you would show us from your word today? We believe that your word is alive and active. That through your word, hearts are still pierced today, and the kind of change you love to see is brought about. So we welcome your presence in this place. We welcome your presence in our hearts, and we just give the rest of this morning to you. We pray this in the powerful name that still saves today, the name of Jesus. And everybody said, amen. Good morning. Good morning to those of you who are watching online. We're glad that you're with us as well. You know, the last few weeks we've been talking about the presence of God. And not just that he's with us, but what does it look like for his presence to actually be invited into every area of our lives? What would change? What would look different? What would it look like if we walked in his presence on a daily basis? And you know, one of the things we've been talking about and that we believe here at Rise Church is that there is absolutely no better place to be than in the presence of God every day. And there's no better place to be than in the presence of the only one who really brings life, that he is life-giving. And, you know, we talked about the presence of God for the last few weeks and how it does a lot of things. It welcomes us, it invites us, it refines us, it changes us from the inside out. Sometimes it burns away some of the things that need to be burned away. And we're looking at different stories in the Bible and different characters where the presence of God really came alive and really invaded their world and affected things in big ways. And so we're looking at another one of those stories today. And today, in 1 Kings chapter 18, that's where we're going to kind of be, if you want to turn there. If not, we'll put it on the big screen up here. This is actually, in my opinion, one of the biggest displays of God's presence in the whole Old Testament. It's a powerful moment where he just comes into their lives in a big way. And it happens at a place called Mount Carmel. Let me read it to you, and then we'll kind of talk about it for a little bit. Verse 20, 1 Kings 18. So Ahab sent word throughout all Israel and assembled the prophets on Mount Carmel. Elijah went before the people, and he said this, "How long will you waver between two opinions?" And in this point in history, the Israelites, the people of God, they find themselves in a bit of a bind. They find themselves kind of straddling this line that they shouldn't be straddling, and I'll explain more later, but there's this king, his name is Ahab, and he's got a wife named Jezebel, and the nation of Israel is right here torn between the worship of God, the one true living God, and the worship of idols, false gods, all those things that we kind of give our attention to and worship that are not the one true God. And Elijah's basically saying to them, hey, everybody, we need to hit the pause button for a second, because I'm seeing some stuff happening here in terms of what you're worshiping and what you're lifting high, and it's not the true living God. And so we need to draw a line in the sand here and decide which side of the line are we going to stand on. How long are you going to waver between these two opinions? How long are you going to waver between these two beliefs? How long are you going to worship more than just the one true God? You can't worship both, and you can revolve your life around idols, but it's time to choose. He's saying, stop wavering between the two. In our modern day, he might have said something to us like, stop worshiping God on Sunday, and then on Monday, you immediately go back to worshiping all these other things. stop worshiping God with this 1 hour every weekend, and then you spend countless hours throughout the week putting other things higher than God. He would say this in different ways to us today, but he would say, choose. It's time to decide. It's time to decide which side of the line you're on. Stop flip-flopping. It's time to choose who you will worship. It continues. He says to them, if the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal or that idol is God, follow him. But the people said nothing. For time's sake, we're going to jump down to verse 30. You can read the in-between part on your own later. It's pretty interesting. But Elijah said to all the people, come here to me. They came to him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord. And this has kind of been my prayer this week as I've been reading this particular story, is that we would be a people that come together and start to repair the broken altars. That there's a lot of broken altars in our lives, in our churches, in our communities, where we are worshiping the wrong things. There's so many things in our lives that we are putting at that highest place that should only be reserved for God himself. And that's worship. That's a form of worship. He repaired the altar of the Lord, which had been torn down. Verse 31, Elijah took 12 stones, one for each of the tribes descended from Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord had come, saying, your name shall be Israel. With the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord, and he dug a trench around it large enough to hold 2 seahs of seed. He arranged the wood, cut the bull into pieces, and laid it on the wood. And then he said to them, fill 4 large jars with water and pour it on the offering and on the wood. Do it again, he said, and they did it again. Do it a 3rd time, he ordered, and they did it a 3rd time. We'll come back to why that matters in a minute. The water ran down around the altar and even filled the trench. It was that much water. At the time of sacrifice, the prophet Elijah stepped forward and prayed, Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, that you are God in my life, not these other things, that you're the God of your people, and that I am your servant and have done all these things at your command. Answer me, Lord, answer me, so these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again. You know, we are part of a church where we get to see hearts turning back to God on a weekly basis. We see people turning to God for the first time. We also see people turning back to God. There could be people in this room this morning who they were following God, they were worshiping God, but now they've gone to a place where we need to turn the heart back to God. Back to God. When we do that, worship will break out. Okay, verse 38. Then the fire of the Lord fell and burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and the soil, and also licked up the water in the trench. When all the people saw this, they fell prostrate and cried, the Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God. Last week we talked about how if you want to welcome and invite God's presence into your life, especially into more areas of your life, a lot of times it begins with posture. If you don't have the right posture, you're not always welcoming his presence into every area of your life. And we talked about how the posture that Jesus often took on, that he modeled, that he taught for us to take on, especially if we want to see the presence of God invade our lives, is a posture of humility. That arrogance and pride have no place in Christianity, even though we typically see those these days way more in our churches than we see humility. But that humble spirit, that humble attitude, that posture of humility where we're willing to kneel before the King, where we're willing to open our hearts and put aside everything else and be humble before him, that's where that intimacy with God comes from. That's where the true relationship with him comes from, and that's where the real worship comes from, where you usher his presence into your life. So we talked about last week, your posture matters. Your posture welcomes his presence. This week, we're going to kind of play off that, but we're going to talk about a different principle. We're going to talk about how worship also welcomes his presence. Worship. But it might not be the worship that you think of, or the worship as you might have defined it. Because a lot of times, what I've noticed in our current church landscape is we define worship as singing and music. And that's a part of it. That's a form of worship. But it's so much more than that. We define worship as the hour that we come together and worship together on Sunday. And that's part of worship. But worship is so much more than that. And if you look at what worship is defined as in the Word of God, it's so much bigger, broader, so much more full than the definition that we've assigned to it sometimes. And when we clear our hearts, when we remove all the distractions, when we tear down the idols, I'm going to get to that in a second, that we have begun to worship, that's when we understand what real worship is. And that's when the presence of God falls on us in new and fresh ways, when we lay that on the altar. Worship welcomes God's presence. And so today, we're talking about a really life-changing truth, if you really get it, but it's also a very simple principle. It's pretty simple. We talked for a few weeks about how you were designed to live in the presence of God. And so if you're living outside the presence of God or ignoring the presence of God, it explains a lot as to why you're never going to find fulfillment. You're never going to fill the empty holes or voids inside, because the only place you can receive that is in the presence of God. And when you're living your life every day in God's presence, in relationship with Him, there's no greater life. There's no greater experience. It doesn't matter what you achieve, what you accomplish, what you go after in your life, or how strong you think you are. The thing that matters is the presence of God in your life. And worship welcomes His presence. It makes so much more of God than maybe you were making before. It lifts Him to a higher place. It recognizes Him for who He is, putting Him in a place in our lives, every area of our lives where they're centered around Him. It welcomes His presence when we worship Him. And again, real quick, many of us, I think, misunderstand the definition of worship and what that really is. Worship is not just music. Worship is a lifestyle. It's the way that we live our lives. You could say worship is declaring the highest worth. And so if that's true, you could also say, well, whatever I assign the highest worth to in my life, whatever I'm putting at the highest place as I live my life or in different areas of my life, that's the thing that I'm worshiping. Worship is simply pointing to something and saying, that's the most important thing in my life, hands down. And everything in my life, by the way, when I'm worshiping this, is going to be subject to that. So that means that if I'm worshiping God, like really, truly worshiping Him, then everything else in my life is going to be subject to Him. How I define myself, my identity is going to be subject to Him. The decisions I make are going to be subject to Him. It's all subject to Him if I'm putting Him at that place of being worshiped. But unfortunately, the reverse is also true. If I'm putting something else at that highest place and I'm worshiping that instead, every other area of my life is going to be subject to that. And that's where we get in trouble. Because worship is declaring that higher worth. Worship is simply lifting something higher than everything else in your life. That thing receives the highest place. And again, the cool thing is when you worship God, you experience God like no other way. When you worship Him with your life, when you say, God, there's so many things in this world that are vying for my attention. There's so many things trying to distract me and trying to get my main focus, but I'm going to just declare that you are number one. I'm going to say that you are at the highest place. Because again, worship is not just the emotional song that we sing right before the pastor gets up to teach the Bible. It's so much more than that. Worship is not just getting together with the church. It's so much more than that. It's putting Him at the highest place and saying, God, I put my faith in you. I put my trust in you. I put my hope in you. I find my peace in you. I'm going to seek my joy in you. I'm going to let you direct not just my general direction, but every area of my life, even the ones I have not surrendered to you yet that I need to. And here's something that I really want to get down in our hearts really deeply. When you worship God, He is your source for everything. He's your source for your identity. He's the source of your peace, the source of your joy, the source of your direction that you're walking, what road you're taking. He's meant to be the source. And when you worship Him, you're putting Him in that place where He's going to be the source. So you receive your identity from Him when you're worshiping Him with your life instead of from somewhere else. And you seek your peace in Him, not in anything else when you're worshiping Him for real. He's the place that joy comes from that can't be ripped away from you no matter what the circumstances are that are happening in your life. And ultimately, whatever you worship is going to direct you. It's going to give you direction. So when you find your identity in something other than God, when you find your peace in something other than God, not only are you not going to get the real deal, but it's going to start to direct you in a direction that's not God's. Because whatever you're worshiping will begin to direct you. And so the challenge is that, and this will be the case for almost anything that we put into that position in our lives other than God himself. And that's the reason, again and again and again in here, and more stories than just the one we're reading, by the way, it's made abundantly clear to us over and over. Take note of what you're worshiping. Take note of what your idols are. Be cautious and pay attention to who or what you're worshiping. And anything you put at that place that's not God, you could define as what we say is an idol. That's an idol. And you'll turn to that thing for peace, and you'll let that thing direct your steps. And hey, let's be real for a second. Every one of us in this room does it. I do it. You do it. We've all done it. We're not talking about, building golden cows and worshiping them on our face here. That doesn't happen in our current culture. But there's other idols. There's a lot of things that we often put in the highest place in our life, that we seek our peace from instead of God, that we think will bring us joy when it won't, that we allow to define us instead of God defining us and telling us who we are. And those things ultimately, again, will direct us down a road. We all do it. What are some of those examples? Well, I've been here before in my life. This was one of mine years ago. Money can be an idol. It can be something that you get to a point in your life where you elevate it higher than everything else. It becomes your main focus. It becomes your main attention. It's where you think you're going to get your peace from. And you think it's going to bring you that joy based on how you spend it or how much you have. If you allow that to be at that high place long enough, it becomes the thing that starts to define you, and people know you by this instead of what they should know you by. And it even starts to direct your decisions and your character and the road that you pass down. This can definitely be an idol. It can be something that you elevate to that place that only God should be. Money's one of the big ones. And that's why, again, the Bible makes it clear. Take careful note of what you're worshiping. There's other ones. Some people have this is an idol, but it looks more like this. Right? And our self-image, how we're appearing to the world around us, what we accomplish and what we achieve and what people see that we have done. How we appear, even though when God says very clearly that he doesn't care about appearance, he cares about the heart. But this is an idol for some of us. Sorry, I'm reflecting light in your eyes. This is an idol for some of us. Have you been there? Putting it at this place where it should not be, caring way too much, finding your peace in that, trying to get joy from that, letting how you appear to others define you instead of allowing God to speak your identity over you. If you allow this to be an idol, this is the thing that will direct you down a path. There's others. Some of you maybe have this as an idol. Just saying. And when we put these jerseys on, sorry if I didn't get your team, just imagine it's whatever team you support. You put these jerseys on and wear them. People know you as this more than they know you as the one who puts on the jersey of Jesus Christ. When we celebrate the wins in this realm, far louder and with so much more joy than we celebrate the 13 people that walked into the waters of baptism last Sunday, it's an idol. When we tailgate this, and we let the smallest thing stop us from gathering with the people of God on Sunday. By the way, I know what time these games start. I think there's a lot of people who think we don't know what time they start, but when you have to, 4 hours before the game starts, have to be at home instead of here, it's an idol. When the first thing we do is get up in the morning and check the scores or the standings instead of checking in with this, it's become an idol. Not a bad thing, by the way. I'm not saying all these things I'm showing you are bad things. Some of them are good things. They're fine things to have in your life. But their place matters. Anything we put in number one spot, anything we devote more attention to, anything we put as a higher priority becomes an idol. I'm going to talk about this one because of the year we're in right now. This is a political season. And some of us need to hear this. Politics can become an idol. I tried to find a prop for this one, and I couldn't find one, so I had them make me one. He's not actually running. He has to stay as our associate pastor, but I would vote for him, though. I'm just saying. I know I'm not supposed to talk about candidates from up here, but I would vote for Pastor Ben for sure. But we make this an idol. And here, let me disclaimer this before I say the rest. I believe we should care about governance. I believe we should care about who's making our decisions. I believe we should care about character and who's in leadership and where we're heading as a nation. I believe we should care about those things. They matter. They're good things to care about. But if nobody in your life knows you as a passionate follower of Jesus Christ and they only know you as a diehard Republican or Democrat, it's become an idol. If you find yourself talking about how the solutions to all the world's problems come from this, instead of from the gospel of Jesus Christ, it might be an idol. If you find that it's making you angry all the time and stealing your peace, it's because you're trying to find your peace in something you were never meant to find your peace in. It's an idol. And it needs to be torn down or at least lowered to its rightful place below King Jesus. When you really reflect on your life, I could keep going down the list. It's amazing how easy it is to find yourself lifting so many different things to a higher place than they should be and being defined by them, seeking your peace in them, thinking they'll bring you joy when they won't, and then you find that they are directing you down a road instead of God. That's where Israel find themselves in this particular story we're reading. The nation of Israel, God's people, the people who made an everlasting covenant with him. And at this point in their history, they had kind of pushed out the worship of the living God and started worshiping these other idols. And at this point, it was the Baals and the Asherahs. And, this made sense if you know the culture and the people, because they were an agrarian society. So, of course, they would have been tempted to worship Asherah, the goddess of reproduction, when they want their agriculture and their livestock to grow. And they were in a drought, and they were very short on water, and it was a famished situation. They needed water desperately, and so they would have, of course, been tempted to worship this god of water, rain, Baal. And so it was very natural for them to lean into these other idols instead of the one true God because, well, they thought they would bring what they needed. But they had pushed out the presence of the living God in a sense, and because they did that, they found themselves in this deep, prolonged drought. 3 years, no rain. 3 years, not even any dew. No presence of God in big ways or refreshing, and they were dry, and God's presence was rare. But then God stepped back into their presence through this guy named Elijah, whose name, by the way, means literally, my God is Yahweh. And he would redeem the situation. He would bring back true worship, which is what he's about to do. And then the rain would fall, and God's presence would come, and the fire of God would come, and it's a crazy story. I love it. But for the next few minutes, I want to really dig in and lean in a little bit to 1 Kings chapter 18, and I want to challenge us all to ask this question, okay? Here's the question. Have we set things up in our lives? Have we set up idols in our lives that, in a sense, have pushed out the presence of God? And what are those? And here's a more challenging question. What would it actually look like if we were to tear these idols down and bring back real worship as the Word of God defines it? Because real worship only worships Yahweh. Real worship only worships the one true God, and it puts him in his rightful place. So I'd encourage you to write some of these things down that I'm going to go through fairly quickly here, because these are the practical pieces of how to address those questions I just asked. And as we look at this story, we're going to see this man of God, Elijah, tear down these idols and return real, true worship to the people. in God's presence and what it looks like. And here's what I want to challenge you to do. I know I say this once in a while. I'm going to say it again. As you listen to this message, my biggest challenge to you is don't think about it how it applies to the person sitting next to you. Don't think about what I'm about to say in terms of how it applies to that really annoying person on Facebook. Look in the mirror, as we all need to do. And I'm challenging myself with this message as well. All week I've been challenging myself with this, trying to look in the mirror and asking myself the question, what idols are still present in my life? What things have I still elevated to the higher place that they don't need to be instead of God? And how is that affecting His presence in my life? We have to get to the point where we ask these hard questions. And the first thing that you'll see that Elijah did in this story is he identified the idols. That's the first thing. If you're going to tear down idols in your life and put God at the true place He needs to be, you have to first identify what your idols are. That's where you need to look in the mirror. That's where you need to ask yourself the hard questions if you're willing to do that. If we're going to get back to real worship, we have to identify the idols in our own lives. And can I just say it? Many of us don't want to hear it. I don't always like to hear that. I don't like to be told what the idols are in my life. I don't like somebody else to tell me, what the thing is that's in my life that is life-taking instead of life-giving. Because that hurts my pride. It hurts my ego. Well, why didn't I notice it then? It's hard to hear that sometimes. It's hard to hear truth, but the truth is, when someone really loves you, they speak truth in love. And if you really want to worship God, and if you really want to live a lifestyle of worship in His presence, you have to be willing to sometimes look in the mirror and identify the idols that are still present in your life that are pushing out the presence of God. I'll give you an analogy. I remember years ago when my wife and I were looking for our first home together. We looked at a few homes, and she happened to be out of town this one time that I looked at the one that I really liked, okay? I found it checked all my boxes. I felt like everything was perfect about this house. I could picture myself living there with her. It was great. But I walked through it with somebody who was much more knowledgeable than myself. And she started to point out all the different things that were broken. Not just small things, but things to where this house was possibly going to completely fall apart in way too short a time. That it would end up costing me way more money than I thought it would cost me. But I'm still, as I'm looking at this house that was beautified and doctored up and looking just perfect, this is the right house for me, though. I can see myself living here. I'll be comfortable here. I got that thing that many of us get when we're out shopping for a home where it's like you see the one you love and you just can't shake it anymore, right? Like you'll be disappointed if you don't get that one. And then somebody has to step in who knows more than you, and they have some amount of wisdom, and they start pointing out all the things about the house that are going to be a problem if you move into it. It's going to be destructive. It's not going to end up being a healthy place to live, even though I can so picture myself living there happily. They see the truth, and they're willing to tell me the truth because they don't want me to end up living in a house that I don't need to be living in. And as disappointed as I was, looking back now with everything I've learned, I can see. I'm glad that she pointed those things out because I didn't need to be living in that house. And so many of us have these things that we lift to a high place in our life, and we allow them to define us, and we seek our peace through them, and we try to find joy in them, and then they ultimately, because we're worshiping them, start to direct our life. And if we're going to break down the idols that are robbing us of true, real worship, we need to confess that we have idols in our lives first. We have to acknowledge they're there. We have to identify what they are, because otherwise we can't tear them down. And so the question is, are we brave enough to do that? Because it takes courage to look in the mirror. It takes courage to say, this has become an idol in my life, and it needs to be torn down or at least lowered to its proper place if it's not a bad thing. It takes wisdom to do that. It takes maturity to do that. And are you willing to say, yeah, there's some things I've fostered in my life in different areas that I've allowed to become a little too big? Are you willing to say, you know what, I always thought that this thing over here was a passion or a hobby or something I just adopted from my parents growing up, but I'm realizing that it's actually become an idol in my life. And are you willing to let go of it and sacrifice it on the altar? The other thing we have to do if we're going to get true worship back in our lives and learn to welcome God's presence into all the areas when it comes to this topic, we don't need to just identify and acknowledge what our idols are in our lives, but we need to have a matchup. We need to have a matchup, which is what happens in this story. When Elijah calls the people together and he basically says, look, bring your idols, I'll bring my God, and let's see who wins. So some of us, we need to actually step back and take a moment to reflect and be honest with ourselves and with our idols and say, you know what? I'm going to match up this idol with God, and I'm going to ask some hard questions. I'm going to let them come at it face to face. They're going to come, man to man, and they're going to face each other, and we're going to see who wins. We're going to see who really brings peace. We're going to see who really is identifying me in the way that I should be defined. We're going to see who brings joy. And that's ultimately going to determine who directs my steps. We need to have a matchup because that's what happens in this story. Elijah brings them together. They meet up on Mount Carmel. And hey, if the idol can give you life, go ahead and worship it. But if my God can give you life, then go ahead and worship the Lord. And so I want to ask you a simple question, okay? What has that big idol in your life, whatever it is, maybe there's a few of them, what has your idol done for you? Just think about that for a minute. If you've identified your idol, what has that idol actually done for you? Has your worship of money actually given you more peace or less peace? Has your worship of money given you more sleep or less sleep? Has it released stress in your life or given you more stress? Has the place you've put money in your life been something that made you more generous or less generous? Has it been something that caused you to be more honest or dishonest because, well, hey, sometimes you have to play the game to get more of it? Has your worship of self-image and the way you look and the way you appear to other people caused you to be a kinder person or a less kind person? Has it caused you to love people better or love people worse? To care more about others than you care about yourself or to care only about yourself? I'm going to be really direct right now. Has the lifting up of your political stances in the way that you have done it made you more compassionate and like Jesus? Or has it made you harder, meaner, and madder when you interact with people and think about the world? Do you have more friends now or less friends now? Do you have more anger in your life now or less anger in your life? Ask the question. Bring a matchup and find out once and for all as you ponder this question, what has your idol really done to you, for you? This is the more important question and the harder one to answer. What has your idol done to you? So what's your idol done for you? If you really match it up, probably not as much as you think. What has your idol done to you? What broken things have resulted in you or in your life as a result of your idol? Because let me tell you, I know what my God has done for me. He met me in the middle of my brokenness when nobody else could. He met me when I was confused about what was true, and he showed me what was true. He met me in the middle of the mud, and he pulled me out of it and put me on solid ground. He gave me true peace. That even though hard things and painful things still happen in my life and in people around me's lives, it still doesn't steal my peace because I know where my peace is coming from. I've tasted that unspeakable joy where even when you're walking through junk, there's still a level of joy there because it didn't come from your circumstances, it came from him. And I've allowed him to start to direct my path in a way where there's so many things in my life that used to direct my path way stronger than I allowed him to. He dealt with many of my fears. He gave me a hope that will never shake. He gave me a purpose on a daily basis. He gave me a future. I know he has plans for me. And every day, he still gives me the breath in my lungs and a purpose with every step. And so if God is God, worship him. If these other things are God, fine, keep worshiping them. What has your idol done for you? What has your idol done to you? Here's the last thing. Many of us, probably most of us, need to come to a place where we bring a sacrifice to the altar. Sometimes you wonder, why is God's presence not more powerful in my life? Why does it seem like I'm pushing it out? Maybe I haven't sacrificed anything. Maybe there's some idols that need to be burned. Something's got to be sacrificed on the altar of my heart before my God. That's worship, right? Last week we talked about how the posture of coming before God is humility, the image of true humility and what that really looks like. It's not thinking less of yourself, it's just thinking more of God. It's not saying all these things are bad, but it's saying God is greater. That's worship. That's what worship is. Worship, again, is not an emotional song that you sing that makes your hair stand up. Worship is not when your favorite song comes on, but you hate the other one, so you don't worship during that one. Worship is not the church service we go to every week in a building. Those are all pieces of worship, but it's so much more than that. Worship is the way we live. It's the way we welcome his presence into every area of our life, and we put him at the highest place in all those areas. Whatever is highest and most important to you, making sure that that is God, and everything else is beneath that. That's worship. And that's what happens here in this story. At the end, Elijah says, hey, put the bull on the altar. I want you to pour 4 large jugs of water over it, and then pour more, and then pour more, and then pour more. And they do it. And you might not have realized the significance of that piece, like, why did he put those details in? Why is he pouring so much water? Remember, they're in a drought. They hadn't had rain in 3 years. Water was these people's most precious commodity. It was their greatest treasure in that moment, the thing they needed the most. And in that moment of sacrifice, Elijah instructs his people as they invite God's presence to pour out their most precious thing. That's what's happening here. They had not experienced refreshing for 3 years. Israel's a dry place to begin with. Can you imagine the man of God asking them to pour out all their water on this bull to make a sacrifice to God when they've already been worshiping these other things? You could say that worship is taking that which is most precious to you and surrendering it to God, laying it at his feet, sacrificing it. That's why I give of my resources to God, because I don't want it to become the biggest thing in my life. I want to give it to him first. That's why I give my time to people, sometimes even when I feel like I don't have any left, because time is one of my most precious treasures. So I ask myself regularly, can I give more focused time to my children? Can I give some of my precious time to this person, and be generous with it? What is most precious to you? And are you willing to surrender it to God? The band's going to come back up. We're going to close in a second, but this is why I serve. Even outside of my normal job, this is why I help church planters and I mentor men sometimes, and I meet with people outside of that, because I don't want my job to become an idol. I want to also be a volunteer. I want to also give of my time to people. Because when I do those things, when I find myself surrendering to him and putting him back in his rightful place when I've allowed other things to go too high, that's when I find I experience his presence the most powerfully in my life. And when I see him start to invade areas where I feel like maybe he was absent. And so I just want to say there could be people in this room, including me, who maybe have not felt the fire of God in a long time, or the presence of God in the way that you want to. And mark my words, you're going to feel it. You're going to feel it, because for the first time in a long time, some of you are going to bring a sacrifice to the altar. So what is it going to be for you? I just want to speak this in faith to you today. What are you going to sacrifice? What are you going to lay at his feet that you've been holding on to too tight and elevating to the place it doesn't need to be? Take the thing you're holding on to so tight because you're afraid not to have it and bring it to the altar and watch the presence and the fire of God consume it. Instead of checking social media or watching the news or checking your sports standings first thing in the morning, check the Word of God first thing in the morning. You want to welcome his presence in? Have that be the first thing you do every day, even if it's only 5 minutes. Because when you bring the sacrifice, then the fire will fall. When you surrender the right things, you could say it this way: no sacrifice, no fire. But when we worship God with our lives, let the fire fall. We need more of God's presence in our lives. And so that's how we're going to kind of wrap up our time here together today. We're going to simply bring our first, bring our best, bring our precious, whatever that is, and simply put it beneath or behind God and rank him number one, because that's worship. And as we bring our sacrifice, I believe with everything in me that his presence will come more alive in your life. And the areas that seem like they were dead or empty will start to fill up. And you'll start to practice this more and more. And the more you bring to the altar, the more you'll see him invade the different areas of your life in the ways that you always hoped he would. Whether it's your marriage or your home, your family, your career, the areas of your character that you've been trying to change, but man, you just can't seem to get past that addiction or whatever it might be. Would you stand with me? You know, some of us, sometimes we lift our hands in worship. And I don't know if you know, but we're not like stretching. Many of us, when we do this, we're actually saying to God, you're the highest. And I'm bringing this thing I'm surrendering this because it's not you. And with open hands, I'm offering it to you. I'm giving it to you. I'm symbolically burning it at the altar. Whatever is really important in my life, I want to put it behind you, God. I want to put it beneath you and lift you higher. Because you're everything. And I'm just believing that in all of our lives and in our church, we're going to step into some true, real worship as described in here. As some idols in our lives are torn down and we bring back the true meaning of worship. To take our most precious thing and pour it out to him. So would you do this with me? Would you just close your eyes? And as your eyes are closed and you're just reflecting, would you just ask yourself this simple but challenging question? Just ask yourself, what is the biggest thing about me? What defines me? Where do I seek my peace? Where do I think I'm going to get joy from? What is leading me and directing my steps? And if you're somebody that can't think of the answer to that question, then you know what? I'm going to be direct with you later. You need to ask your wife. Or your husband. What would your good friend who loves you enough to tell you the truth in love say is most important to you? And are you willing to ask them that question and receive the answer? Just reflect for a minute. What would the things you spend your finances on say about what's most important to you? What would your calendar say is most important to you and where your time is going? What is the most important thing to you in your day-to-day life? And then take that as we lift our hands in surrender and put it beneath God and rank him higher. Jesus, I speak in your name. We want more of your presence in all areas of our life. And as many of us in the days to come step into fresh sacrifice and surrender, would your presence fall on us more and more? In Jesus' name. And all the true worshipers said, come on, let's worship God.